Cool. So everybody, today my guest is Haley McNamara, and Haley is the director at International Center on Sexual Exploitation. She regularly speaks and writes on topics including child sexual abuse, sex trafficking, prostitution, sexual objectification, and much more. And currently she's fighting Pornhub because they were recently, after the New York Times article came out, charged with a couple of lawsuits because on their side they were hosting videos with unverified content, unverified users, some kids being assaulted, and a much more troublesome thing. So we're gonna dive deeper into that. But thank you, Haley, for stopping by. First of all,
thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Definitely. Maybe we can start with your work. So can you give us an overview of what does National Center on Sexual Exploitation does in a nutshell?
Sure. So similar to what you were saying about the kind of the issues we write on, we work on a wide variety of sexual exploitation and abuse issues. A lot of the times people hear those phrases and they only think about sex trafficking. And we certainly work on that issue, but we also are seeing that that issue is connected to a lot of other issues like child abuse, pornography, as we'll be talking about today. And so we try to connect those dots. And then we do a lot of policy work, particularly in the US. And also we lead a large coalition, international coalition, very diverse groups and advocates. And we also do work with corporate responsibility. So we try to make sure that companies like Google and Instagram and others are not making the problem worse and that they're trying to protect people where they can.
So you've just mentioned a couple of stakeholders, like you have corporations, then you have government and different people. So who of these stakeholders is actually like the most, I don't know, not effective, but the most pro this work that you do at the center?
It's a great question because you would maybe think that, oh, well, governments, they're really going to get it, or maybe a corporation would really understand it, but it really comes down to the individuals that we're working with, I think. There's a lot of different priorities that everyone's balancing, especially when it comes to policies, but we know that it's going to be a good relationship. We've had so many, both politicians and corporate leaders say, hey, well, we're parents too, or, I know someone who had a bad experience with a kind of abuse. And so I care about this. And when people kind of have that personal connection, then we know that they're going to be a really strong ally. But it's kind of hard to say that one sector is more predictable than another.
Mm-hmm. I guess one question that comes to my mind is many people nowadays, porn is something that people watch, everybody. I mean, it's just normal, but it didn't used to be like that. Like 20 years ago, when I was like 10, we didn't have this much access to it. And it wasn't really normal that as a 15-year-old, I would see like thousands of crazy videos, which nowadays is. So I guess my question is, there's a thin line between just being, watching porn or something, but then going into extreme, and maybe people don't really relate to like sexual exploitation. I would never do that, but they don't really realize that they're actually participating in it somehow, maybe as a viewer or something like that. So where do you see that line breaking? Because porn is kind of accepted as like, it's everybody can do it now, but how do you think, I don't know, where the line is basically? Yeah.
It's a great question and such a complex topic. I mean, I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head with the fact that so many people are being exposed to this increasingly at young ages because it's online. I am a millennial, Gen Z, they even have it worse. They probably saw stuff even younger. But for me, I knew particularly young boys who at age 9 or 10 were just playing video games, and a pop-up came up with a really graphic, violent, pornographic scene, and then have gone on, and then you're curious because there is kind of a natural curiosity about what is sex, and people kind of look at it. But so at least to start off, I would say I really view especially young men and young women, although young women more and more are being exposed to it and watching it at young ages. But I mean, I think it's like 93% of men, one study said, before puberty were seeing pornography. And that's so young. So that's going to have such a big impact on your development and your relationships, just the way that you kind of interact and see these kinds of issues. So in a meta sense, I really view the pornography industry in many ways as being a mega predator of young boys. And so many are exposed at very young ages and then go on to either escalate into watching more extreme things or watching a larger amount than they maybe would have ever before. So I think that that's something that's really important too, is there's actually a lot of brain science and studies that have been done on the impact of pornography on the brain. And this does link back. We're kind of going on a journey here. But since 2009, I think there've been 50 neurological studies that show that pornography has a negative impact on the brain in a couple different ways. So one study found that regular pornography users, the aspects of their brain that deal with motivation and decision-making and impulse control actually shrank. And especially if you're thinking about young kids viewing this, has even more of an impact. So that's concerning. These kinds of studies have also found that pornography use typically requires some amount of escalation. The idea of escalation, we're pretty familiar with in the idea of like drug or alcohol addiction, where someone maybe starts, you just have a couple of drinks and then suddenly, your frequency or the intensity of what you're consuming increases to get the same old high or to get the buzz that you used to. And not for every user of pornography, data, it's not every single person, but have that escalation. And that escalation could be either into more violent or shocking material and more degrading material, etc. So because of the ways that we see the pornography industry really is targeting young boys to make sure that they become consumers. And then we see how pornography impacts the brain, making many people who would never have initially thought that violence would turn them on in any way. Suddenly their preferences, they're kind of escalating into that. And then you get to the issue of, many of these pornography sites actually do have real life, sexual violence and similar issues on their platforms. So I think we are seeing that, the pornography industry is impacting, our cultural's idea of what is acceptable as far as sexual violence goes. It just becomes normalized to many users.
Yeah, I think also sexual preference changes. Like, basically, I mean, I would say I was sort of addicted to porn maybe at some time, like in the past, and it started off with like a very simple, let's say, video, but after 10 years, it wasn't that simple. I know some people who started off watching, let's say, heterosexual porn, and they ended up watching homosexual porn, and they weren't even homosexual, but they couldn't go back anymore. So it kind of escalated their sexual preference because they would keep recommended other videos and stuff like that. And it goes slowly, but it's kind of like, it doesn't end well. Usually it doesn't go like you still want more because the lust never kind of ends, I guess. So why do you think like young men have these issues with porn? I think, is it because of the dopamine release? Once they have a need, then they can just watch something. They don't have to engage in real life with, let's say, in a real, I don't know, sex or something, but they just do it virtually, and then it creates like a loophole in their brain, kind of like a habit, and they just keep coming back for it. Or do you have any data around that sort of behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. I met someone a while ago who was a recovering cocaine addict and also a recovering pornography addict. And he said that actually recovering from pornography was more difficult for him than cocaine. And the reason why is because there's not really a deeply embedded biological drive to do cocaine, at least not initially. You're not born with, or, by the time you hit puberty, you don't have an innate desire for that. But, the biological sexual drive is something that's innately ingrained in vast majority of people. And so I think that really plays into why it can be so difficult to not watch pornography, again, paired with the fact that most likely you've been exposed to it when you're under 18. So your brain is not fully developed. And then you have a natural drive that makes it very difficult to turn away from. And like I said, there's so many studies that show that pornography use can, not for everyone, but for many, can become very compulsive and can then have a host of mental health harms, even physical harms, such as there's this more recently discussed phenomenon of pornography-induced erectile dysfunctions, where someone's sexual interest has really become wired to the pixels on a screen instead of a real-life partner, because a real-life partner is a static human being who also kind of has their own preferences and ways that they would like things to go, versus being able to kind of scroll through so many different images so fast. And I think that's also part of the reason why so many people struggle with pornography, because if you think back 1,000 years, our ancestors would never have, had this many access to this many sexual partners. It's almost like our brains were not wired or evolved or set up to have this kind of information thrown at us. And people are recognizing that in other fields. They're recognizing, social media and kind of the 24-hour news cycle, like these things are not how the human brain was initially sort of built to work. And people are recognizing that that's harmful. But then when it gets to the issue of pornography, people don't want to talk about it as much.
Yeah, I think nowadays there's a huge movement online, especially it's called NoFap among young men, and they kind of recognize that this is not healthy and they're trying to stay out of it. So people get to that conclusion somehow, and parents think, like my mom or my grandfathers, they think like porn, they just think like some erotic movie. They haven't actually watched it, so they have no idea what's going on. And as you said, erectile dysfunction and all these things, like I had so many effects from just watching it, because it's not like you can watch porn and then just go about your day. Like it's not like you watch something and then you have to go to work. Like how do you feel in that transition? Like you just watch something disgusting and then you have to interact in a normal society with normal people, and it's like there's a huge like difference between that. And if people live in those two worlds, it's kind of like creates a huge amount of depression, I think.
Yeah, I really think so. A lot of times people will say, well, it's like watching a movie. People can know the difference between fantasy and real life. That's something that I hear a lot. And that is true, but it is different. It has an impact, because when you're watching pornography, you are engaging in a like biological sexual act. You aren't just looking at it the way that you look at a painting. So what's happening in your brain is far more significant. The neurons that are firing, and those are laying down these neuronal pathways that make what you're viewing be more normalized to you. And there've been a number of studies that show that pornography actually, when someone's watching it, it does impact the way that they view the world. Whether that's people regularly who are watching it are more likely to believe rape myths. They're more likely even to act out in a sexually aggressive way. And, someone might say, well, of course I would never do that. I know that it's, fantasy. But if your brain is wiring that sexuality is supposed to be aggressive, then for many people, they will act out more in that way, kind of following, we call them like sexual scripts, that people assume that's how interactions are going to work. And yeah, it's a really big problem. I mean, just the other week, I was talking with someone in Australia. She works with young schoolgirls, and she was saying that all of these high schoolers thought that painful sex was normal, that sex was supposed to be painful. And that was because of the influence of pornography in their peer group.
Yeah, and I think it kind of like destroys families, especially if a father is watching that and then he can't get it from his wife the same way that he's watching things on Pornhub or somewhere, he's gonna cheat on her. Like at some point he's gonna decide to visit like some brothel or something like that. And there's so many cases like that, and they do it just because they see this reality that is not real online, and they want to live it, but it's not possible, like with a normal wife, like to have these sort of crazy behaviors going on. So yeah, it destroys families at some point, I think. So yeah, I mean, this is a difficult topic, and I mean, it's been for me 4 months since I stopped watching anything, and I haven't went back, and it's been great. I mean, everything kind of changed in my life since then. So yeah, that's awesome. But maybe we can talk about now the Pornhub and how does it fit in your work. Basically, like, what's the problem for people who haven't heard about this case? What is the problem with Pornhub today?
Okay, so most people, when they think of the pornography industry, they think of Pornhub. It's one of the most mainstream companies. They've had celebrity spokespeople, and everyone thinks, well, there might be abuse in some areas of the pornography industry, but Pornhub is a good example of the pornography industry done right. So Pornhub's up on this pedestal, but it turns out that even this site, which is the most mainstream, like supposedly the best practices, they were not requiring age or consent verification for videos uploaded to their site. So what that means is there have been numerous women and girls who were sex trafficked, and videos were taken of them while they were being sex trafficked and uploaded to the site. Videos of real life rapes that were then uploaded to the site. Even videos of child sex abuse, otherwise known as child pornography, were then uploaded to Pornhub. And also, non-consensually recorded or shared pornography as well, sometimes called revenge porn. And to the point where there were a number of survivors of child sexual abuse who reached out to Pornhub and said, hey, they were raped. That video was put up on Pornhub. I'm a child, please take it down. And Pornhub refused to take down their videos. And so this really kind of started gaining most traction with the story of Rose Kalimba, who that's what happened to her. And she had a article come out in the BBC in early 2020. And that really led more survivors to start coming forward and sharing their similar stories. So in December, I believe, 2020, the New York Times also did an article on this, and it's by Nicholas Kristof. The title is "The Children of Pornhub," if anyone wants to go and watch it. And similarly, he went through just a number of these survivors who went through a horrible trauma, found out that their trauma was being viewed and downloaded by hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, through Pornhub, and contacted Pornhub, and they refused to take it down. In fact, one of the survivors who spoke in that New York Times article said that essentially Pornhub became her trafficker. And I think it's important to just pause and realize the ongoing trauma it causes, that not only did you experience abuse, but now hundreds of thousands of people you're still kind of being abused because people are still like engaging with this material and finding it arousing. And many of these girls would talk about how they walk around and they don't know who has viewed, the darkest point in their life. So that's incredibly traumatic. And Pornhub has been remarkably callous in this entire process. So Pornhub is owned by a larger company called MindGeek, and they own almost all of the pornography industry. People think that all of these porn sites are, random websites owned by individuals, but it's like Coca-Cola owns everything, Disney owns everything. MindGeek is like the Disney of the pornography industry. And they have a headquarters in Canada. And so they've been giving testimony. They were called before the Canadian Ethics Committee. to answer for these problems. And essentially, they gave no answer. They essentially confirmed that they are not, doing these any kind of meaningful verification. They're supposedly trying to fix that now, but they're not able to fix it. It's a little bit of an intrinsic problem. Also, just similarly, because it connects, X videos is one of the other very large pornography websites. And they've also had numerous lawsuits against Pornhub and X videos on behalf of survivors whose abuse content was uploaded there, profited by these pornography companies. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So what was the problem with the verification process? I mean, if there's a clearly like a rape going on, do the employees of Pornhub, aren't they checking it, or is it too much of the content to be checked? So don't they have like an AI that goes through it like a YouTube, or why didn't they pick these things up before?
Yeah, you would think that for their business model that they would be trying to do everything they can, but they really weren't. Actually, it came out during their testimonies before the Canadian Ethics Committee that for about 10 years, they reported 0 cases of child sex abuse or child pornography to the authorities. For 10 years, 0 cases. That means that they weren't looking. And there's actually a top communications employee for Pornhub who's been found on Reddit to be instructing people not to report if they see something that they think is child pornography to the authorities, but only to report it to Pornhub. So my personal opinion is that they're bad actors, and they knew that they were profiting off of this material to some extent. I mean, they clearly knew in cases where survivors were contacting them saying it was non-consensual material, and they left it up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's not like it was viewed by like 5 people or something. It kind of recommended it to the main categories, I guess, that type of content. So it was viewed by many people, right?
Yeah, hundreds of thousands. And Pornhub, up until very recently, because they've been under pressure, they deleted like 80% of the videos on their platform, which sounds like they were pretty sure 80% of them might have been questionable. I don't know, that was fishy to me. But they also used to have a download button. So they were not only helping distribute the streaming of child pornography, but also people were able to download it. And that's a problem too, is people would download something, even if something did get removed, they would re-upload it somewhere else. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a big problem. And so the unverified content now, it's completely removed from Pornhub, or what's the situation with it?
So the reason why they removed 80% of their videos was they say they removed all of the unverified videos. Mm-hmm. So supposedly now it's only verified videos, but here's the problem with that. They have verified videos of sex trafficking in the past. There was a case called Girls Do Porn. It was one of the first big sex trafficking civil cases against a pornography company. And it was about over 20 women who were, they were given alcohol and drugs and kind of coerced, pressured to sign contracts in order to produce this pornographic content. They were promised that, it would never go anywhere other than, a few select distributors. It ended up on Pornhub as verified content. And Pornhub left those videos up there even for months after, this case came out. And it was very clear that these women were coerced and non-consenting to what ended up happening. So we have a little bit of a problem, right? Like, how can these sites actually meaningfully verify consent? Because someone can be coerced to sign a contract. They have been coerced to sign contracts. So I think it's a really big problem. And interestingly enough, X videos recently came out on Twitter and said something like, well, all of these, for us to try to keep abuse off of our content, we would just have to review everything so closely. And we're like, yeah, that's the problem. It's because you all haven't been doing this.
Yeah. Or they could just add a button on YouTube, you have a copyright claim. So somebody who who has a content up there and they don't want it there, they've been I don't know, raped or something, they can just claim it and it gets down from the site. Like it's not that difficult, I guess, if they know that this specific piece of content is that some, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe they could
And it
develop.
seems like people that, and that's such a good example where I think so many people take copyright issues more seriously.
Mhm.
You know, if it was a copy, you know, if it was a Disney Channel scene that ended up on Pornhub, immediately would be taken down because of copyright issues.
Yeah.
But if it's like the rape of a 14-year-old, they don't take it, they don't err on the side of taking it down. Mhm.
Yeah, I guess there's no like incentive or something for them. And so what is the process for a verified user? Like if I'm uploading something, how can I become verified?
There's a couple different ways. They've actually been kind of changing around how they're doing it. So I'm not sure exactly what they're doing right now, but in the past, it's been things like hold up your driver's license in a photo to show that it's you, or write your username on like your arm and take a picture with it so they can verify that you're, the user. But even in those cases, they were not verifying the age or consent of everybody in those videos. They were only verifying the identity of the person uploading the video. So that was a big problem too, is that, someone could be a verified uploader, but it doesn't mean that everyone in the video was consenting or of age. Mhm.
Got it. Do you know what is the main business model of Pornhub? Do they make money from ads mostly, or how does it
Yeah.
work?
Yeah, 50% of MindGeek, the owner of Pornhub and others, 50% of their revenues from advertisers. And interestingly, they're a very fascinating company because obviously they have all these pornography sites, but they've also really built their own kind of ecosystem within themselves. So they have their own web hosting service, they have their own payment processor or like bill processor.
Mhm.
They have their own internal kind of advertising company. But 50% of the revenue comes from ads. Some of their top mainstream advertisers include Diesel, Diesel, which is an Italian clothing company, and the Wish shopping app, which is
Mhm.
one of the most popular shopping apps. Mhm.
Got it. So yeah, that's concerning. In terms of maybe what's currently happening on Pornhub, is there a lawsuit that against them? And are you part of it? Or can you maybe explain a little bit what the lawsuit is about?
Yeah, so there's a number of lawsuits right now going after Pornhub and X videos, actually a number of different pornography sites that have allowed this to happen. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation has a law center that seeks to represent survivors against institutions that have profited or enabled their abuse. And so in partnership with some other law firms, we are representing some survivors against Pornhub in a class action lawsuit who were underage and abused in the videos that ended up on the platform. Mhm.
Do you think
So
that, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's a good thing that these lawsuits are now happening, but we also need government investigation. That's something that's been very frustrating, is we haven't heard from a government yet, whether the U.S. or Canadian, that they're looking to hold these sites accountable for facilitating, I mean, sex trafficking. It's like, this is like bigger than Jeffrey Epstein as far as the number of people who have been abused, the amount of money that's been made. This is one of the largest sexual exploitation rings of the decade. So we're waiting
Mhm.
for some criminal accountability. Mhm.
Do you think the future of sort of porn industry and Pornhub is more about this top-down action where the government and the corporation, they sort of create some sort of regulation together with you and they crack down on it? Or do you think it's more about bottom up to really educate people because they still gonna watch it? So is it more about the sort of individual approach and really showing people that, hey, you're just because you watch this video, you could actually be contributing to this and kind of like building some awareness about this, and not just going at it from the government level? Like, do you think, what do you think is more like effective, I think, in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I think obviously right now we have an opportunity for some criminal accountability and some civil like liability accountability. So I want us to take advantage of that because kind of this groundswell movement that's happening right now it's kind of like once in a generation opportunity, I think. But for the long term, I think what you're saying about this more grassroots approach of individuals just really realizing, if I'm regularly watching stuff on these sites, you don't know what's happening in those people's lives, the coercion that's taking place, even, the impact on your own brain and mental health and relationships. Like maybe this is just something that's worth decreasing or getting rid of in our own lives. And I think that's that movement is also growing very strong right now. In some ways, I think our generations have been the subjects of one of the greatest social experiments in all existence by growing up with access to this material. And now the research is starting to come out and we're starting to reflect on our own lives and also seeing the exploitation and realizing that, this probably just isn't an industry to support.
Yeah. Do you think like there's inherent problem with just porn itself? Or do you think regular porn, not like Pornhub made, but just regular porn is okay? Like where do you think there's a line between, what's like on Pornhub or versus what's maybe at home? Or I don't know if you have any views on that.
Yeah, our organization believes that all pornography is harmful. That first of all, it's always sexually objectifying. It's always treating someone else as an object, a thing to, a sexual means, which I think is just that mentality manifests in 100 different ways that are all like so harmful and not acknowledging the dignity of the human. So I think that all pornography is harmful. Certainly, though, once you get into this commercial element, it becomes especially nefarious because there will always be people who are willing to coerce and abuse to make the profit. But I think too, a lot of the times people will ask me, well, what about feminist pornography or like very ethical pornography where they show a very relational like experience between the individuals and it's focused on, mutuality in the scene. So someone might look at that and say, well, maybe someone individually doesn't have a problem with that. The problem then, though, goes back to the brain science and that escalation that we know happens is even if someone starts watching that, they're not going to spend their whole lives only watching that. They're going to escalate into more of the abusive material, unfortunately, because the brain's just looking for something shocking. So that's kind of a long-winded answer. I think it's all pretty problematic. Just another tangent. Sometimes people will ask about sexting, individuals sending photos or images back and forth. One thing that I think is just important for everyone to know, and I think it's something that makes me so nervous, so I always want to share it. The Internet Watch Foundation did a study and found that 88% of shared sexually explicit images like that are shared with an unintended third party. And so that's concerning. And very often those kinds of images are used as blackmail for coercion as well. So like once you start digging into these issues, you just see that it almost always ends up in a bad place.
Yeah, but it starts off with sort of like not easy, but it starts off simple because like nowadays you can see even on YouTube where when you watch a video of like some attractive woman, let's say, there are comments on YouTube referencing Pornhub and just like making fun of it, like, oh, I'm gonna go there and do this, and it's like it's become like a norm now. So it's nothing weird anymore. It's normal to go on Pornhub. There's nothing wrong with it, and people who don't watch porn are weird, which is funny because it's actually the other way around, right? It's not normal. It's just that majority of people have basically agree that it's normal, but there was a gradual process of decades. Like my mother or my grandfather never even thought of this, and they could even right now they can't even understand what's going on. So yeah, I think like the sexual landscape or morality, I think, is like moving around. Where do you think this leads, like from like a society perspective, on like the overall, I don't know, consciousness of society on this issue in like
Yeah,
10 to 20 years?
that's a great question. I think one analogy that I like to use a lot is I think back. So I'm living in England right now, but I'm from the US, probably obviously for my accent. And in the US, smoking in the 1950s was incredibly prevalent, like indoors, restaurants, pregnant women smoking, celebrities were constantly smoking in TV, so it looked glamorous. Doctors would even talk about, well, this cigarette is kind of healthy for you, and promote it as a really good and positive thing. And then over a number of decades, the research started coming out about the harms. And what happened was really a public health, multifaceted response of people realizing this was not healthy. And there was some more regulation around it, not having it in public spaces, making it much more difficult for children to get it, and that kind to get cigarettes and that kind of thing. And I think that's what I think we're approaching the tipping point for a similar movement or moment for pornography. It's, unless we get rid of the internet, pornography is never going away. So that's true. But we as a society, I think, can recognize that it's harmful, can especially make sure that children don't have it, can normalize talking about the harms and also the recovery aspect, what it takes to, remove this from your life when so many people have really been glued to it for a decade or more of their life. So I would like to see that kind of public health, multifaceted, educational movement take place.
Yeah, I think if you told me this 5 years ago, I would be like, hey, that's my freedom. I can just watch it. Like, you don't have to watch it. Like, my freedom. Why are you impacting my freedom? And so that's like a problem, right? Because some people are addicted to it and they will never want this to go away because it's part of their identity, part of their life. They do it like twice a day, maybe. So if you remove that, then it's going to be a problem. And they can't go back to just doing the regular thing without looking at porn. It's not possible anymore. So they need it after some years. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think many people think that they need it, but there's so many cases of people who are heavily addicted for long periods of time who are able to step away from it. And I think maybe if there's anyone who's watching who regularly uses it, and kind of thinks that it's not affecting them, maybe just try to go a week without it and see how that impacts your mentality. I mean, we do things like juice cleanses or social media, like logging out of your social media for a week, just to kind of get in touch with yourself again and see maybe how different things are impacting you. And so I would just encourage anyone to, just experiment with that and see what happens.
Yeah. If you want to find out if you're addicted, it's the simplest to do. Like I was like listening to a lot of music for a few months, and I wanted to stop listening to music because it was really affecting me. So I stopped for a week, and I didn't miss it, and I haven't listened to any music for 4 months anymore.
Oh,
Because
wow.
yeah, it wasn't like really great for my. I was always like in my head with the music, and it's like at some point you realize like you need to live in the real world. Like just stop just listening to music. And with everything it's like that. So try it for a week and see if it's fine for you. In terms of maybe I was wondering, so what do you think is the solution? Like, I'll tell you in my case what helped me to overcome almost all of my addictions. I mean, this is very individual, but I basically became more religious. So I turned to faith, and clearly any sort of religion gives you the sort of higher level of morality where they tell you you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't look into these things. So once you start believing it, because I was an atheist before, once you start getting into some of the religions, they teach you that these things, you should avoid them. But I guess this is not the case for a lot of people. So what do you think people could do if they want to change, but it's like hard, except like going for religion? Is there another path?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of great tools and communities out there. So obviously religious communities, that's like a great place for those who identify with that. There's also, you mentioned nofap.com, which most people know about, but they have a wide variety of views on there, but largely secular. And so that's maybe a community to go just to talk more with people. But there's also a lot of really great tools that can be used. One that I really recommend is called Covenant Eyes. And it's essentially an app, it's a service. And what it does is it's an accountability service. So their idea is that if you're struggling with pornography, or if you're just trying to, maybe take a year off and see how your relationships develop, the pornography use, and especially pornography addiction, really thrives in isolation. It's something that people in your life don't know about, that's a big part of your life. So what this app and system does is you can choose an accountability partner, like your best friend or your brother, and it will send them just little updates. I think it's once a day, or maybe it's every week, about if you've looked at a pornography website or not. And even just and then I think that's a helpful way to do it, because it's not incredibly draconian. And then you can have a conversation with the other person and say, yeah, I did go and watch that this week. I realized it was because I was really stressed out, and it seems like stress is maybe a trigger for you to use it, or loneliness, or, maybe you haven't been able to go outside for a week because of COVID and you're so bored that that's what you resort to. And it helps to, I think, take it out of something where it's just you alone. It's something that you can talk about with someone and identify what the triggers are for why you use it.
Yeah. And anytime you watch a porn, it's never like, you kind of remove the idea that this human being has like, it's a human being, like, and you just focus on the physical things, because once you start understanding that this human being, like they have a soul, it's a real human being, like it's not a piece of meat, then it kind of like your mind starts telling you this is wrong, and you want to remove that because you want to go for your lust, and it's like that's a battle in your own head you have to deal with, like it's very difficult, but yeah, you can't just look at people and not realize that they're human beings actually, just because they're in some video setting or something. And porn industry thrives on that, I think, on that idea that this is not like a real human being, it's just like this flesh you can use. And it's very kind of problematic, I think, for the whole society.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's not the kind of mentality you want to be training yourself to have. It's not how you would want someone to treat you, or, a woman or girls in your life. And I think in some ways, that's why all of these revelations about the massive amount of abuse content on these mainstream pornography sites is also so shocking to people, because it's making them realize, oh, well, maybe the person in that video didn't actually enjoy what they were doing. Maybe they were actually coerced. Like, you as the viewer, you don't have any way to know. You don't. And so that's, it just makes you kind of think about, well, what's going on in this person's life that this is where they're at. There have been studies that showed individuals in the pornography industry are far more likely to have been abused as children, to be living in poverty, and to leave the pornography industry still in poverty. Sometimes people think like, oh, well, they get really rich. They don't. They typically enter and leave while still in poverty. And also typically afterwards suffer worse mental health than the average population. I think just anytime you start thinking about who the real people are, it's much better. And that's too why I kind of started our conversation saying I really empathize with young men who are struggling with pornography and regularly using it, because like I see them as real people too, and I kind of understand how someone gets to that place. So we all just need to treat each other as people, not objects.
Yeah, like imagine you have a daughter, you wouldn't want her to be treated like that, or your mother. It's like that simple. And you just have to control your urges. You're not an animal. You're like a human being. You can control your urges. It's not like you have to do this. You can stop yourself from doing it consciously, and you can just go about your day. You don't have to do it. Just have more not self-awareness. What am I looking for? Some form of control of your life, right? Don't
Yeah,
get
control and accountability.
yeah.
So that even if, because also sometimes people will feel really discouraged if they've been trying to stay away from it for a long time, and they slip up and rewatch it. But that all of that progress of time spent away from it wasn't lost. Like you still have that, and you can get back on track if that's something that you're trying to avoid. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess it's in a more broader sense, like everything is now made so that like if you're hungry, you can take takeout. If you want this, you can do this. So the whole society is set up so they can instantly fulfill your needs. And it kind of creates these problems like, we should really realize also like where our food comes from. Don't just rely on takeout. Don't just rely on these things. Like, what if they just go away? What happens then? Like, this instant gratification, I think, is an issue as well, and it creates this feedback loop in this porn space. So
Yeah,
very difficult.
definitely. Like across our entire society, that's something that we're all struggling with.
Yeah, that's why I'm doing fasting and stuff like that, like just consciously going against like food and stuff, and just trying for a day and seeing if I can make it, and then okay, I'm more stronger than I thought I am, then let's go do something else, right? And there's so many things you can do.
Yeah.
So what's maybe one thing people can do to take action to maybe not attack but dismantle Pornhub's maybe business model, or like create more awareness, except like them stopping watching it? What else can we get involved in? Is there like a fundraiser or something we could support?
Yeah, there's so much that you can do. So one great place to start is traffickinghub.com. Is a movement started by an ally of ours. They have a petition that right now has over 2 million signatures, just to hold Pornhub specifically accountable. So you could sign that petition. We're also asking people to reach out, especially to Diesel, that Italian clothing company, and the Wish shopping app, to tell them to stop advertising with this exploitive company. And similarly, there's a couple other mainstream companies that have been supporting and standing by Pornhub. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Roku. They're especially in the US and UK and Canada, but they're a media streaming device, and they have a private channel for Pornhub. And that means that Roku has helped distribute child sexual abuse materials. Like,
Mhm.
I can't think of any other that's like such a high degree of liability. The fact that they're still standing by Pornhub and still streaming their content after all of this has come out is wild to me. So I think reaching out to these companies, even on Twitter, is a really helpful thing, or sending an email to their customer service. It's just it's pretty wild. I mean, I'm not generally a fan of cancel culture. That's not my ideal world to
Mhm.
live in, but we should all agree to cancel like child sex trafficking. So if there ever was a time for, calling for corporate accountability on these kinds of things, I think now is a pretty good time to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, or writing to the head of marketing of those companies. You can find them on LinkedIn, you can find their emails, and then you can just write them an email or make a video for them on YouTube or something. Make
Yeah.
them feel accountable for these
The
things.
pressure. We have we have a web page. Our website is endsexualexploitation.org. If you slash Pornhub, then we're keeping some updates there also with more information about what's gone on, and some of those action opportunities. We have some really easy ways that people can contact the companies. And we also recently held a briefing for some members on Capitol Hill about the criminal conduct done by MindGeek. And
Mhm.
that video is there also if you wanted more details. Some survivors spoke as well. It was really powerful.
Can we sign the petition online? Is it still valid?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Traffickinghub.com.
Okay, so we'll definitely, guys, go check out traffickinghub.com. It's going to be linked in the description also, and sexualexploitation.org. And then, yeah, I'm going to link both Diesel and Wish and some other advertisers perhaps. And you guys can go and make them know that what they're doing is not right. Maybe on Google reviews, you can do Twitter. There's so many things you can do, LinkedIn. And yeah, it was really great, Haley, for that you stopped by and you kind of gave us this overview of what's going on with Pornhub and generally with porn, and it was really insightful. So thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate it for sure.
Oh, I appreciate you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Definitely. Take care. Bye-bye.